Welcome to the Forge Truth Podcast, where we are building great men as God defines greatness. Forge is a movement of men with a mission to help all men realize they're the deeply beloved, redeemed sons of the Most High God. I'm your producer, Zach, and I'm here to discuss the issues that affect men the most with our two hosts, Dr. Pete Alwinson, lifelong pastor and leader of Forge, and Jayson Quiñones, Bishop of Core Faith Church in Oviedo, Florida. Men, welcome to the show.
Hey, good to be here. Here we are.
Yes, we are here doing one of our favorite things to do.
That's right.
Discuss things that affect men the most.
That's right.
Yes, absolutely. And we have a special guest in the Studio C with us right now. Yeah. It's Scott McCurdy. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, just honored to be here, guys. Appreciate it very much.
It's great to have you. Pete, you've known Scott for a long time. Why don't you introduce him?
Yeah, we have dirt on each other, but
lots.
But Scott's one of those guys that is an open book, as you will see, and just a wonderful friend, good friend, and know his family, love his family. And Scott's been in construction. Now you are really following the whole idea of being rewired rather than retired.
Absolutely.
You still keep connected with Coastal Reconstruction, which is the agency you started. And,
yes, I go in Mondays only, and all I do is stir the pot.
There you go. There you go. But Scott is a communicator and a salesman par excellence. And but you know, we brought Scott in today because he is not only one of our team leaders at Forge. In fact, you and Bishop share that table on Tuesdays.
We
the
do.
Most popular table.
It is, and yes, the
one that talks
the most
the most.
riotous table. And,
yeah.
It's a wonderful table.
And righteous.
Righteous, yes. We repent before it's all over. We definitely come to repentance. And
I know.
Yeah.
Golly. But Scott's got a particular calling and interest in mentoring. We're going to talk about that. That's what we want to talk about, and we want to get you talking. But real quick, I just want to lay out there that the whole idea of mentoring for my generation, Scott and my generation, was that if you were a young guy like you, Zach, you would come up to the older guy and say, hey, would you help me out in this particular area? Would you mentor me? And then the older guy would say, well, yeah, let's start meeting. And really the questions came from the mentee to the mentor, and the mentor didn't really prepare. He just kind of shared his life. And I think that's morphed a little bit today, but the whole idea of discipleship is the biblical, what we're called to do. What Jesus has called us is to make disciples. Amen. Which involves leading people to Christ, building them up in the faith, and then deploying them as active servants of the Great Commission. But mentoring is a big part of that discipleship process. Can be.
Yes.
And
should be.
It should be. And so what we want to do is we want to talk about, how do you mentor, Scott? And what have you learned about mentoring other people? And then we'll just have a free-for-all. By the way, the word mentor goes way back into the hallowed ancient history of Greece, where Odysseus in Homer's Odyssey went away to fight the Battle of Troy. And he left his friend, Mentor, to take care of his son, Telemachus. And while Odysseus was gone for a long time. And so Mentor was, and then that's what sort of came a friend, a guide, to Telemachus, the son of Odysseus. So there it is. So what do we learn about mentoring today? Do you guys mentor, by the way? Bishop, do you mentor?
Yeah, mentoring. I wouldn't. Yeah, I mean, it's like you said. It's more of a discipleship type relationship. There's some guys that have good questions and they need some direction, and there's other guys that you just, hey man, I want to teach you some stuff. But I think that one thing that I hear you saying, I think, is mentoring is really about relationship.
Totally.
And the one thing that I will say about my relationships a lot of times is, I think the questions from the mentees or the person you're discipling, they actually, I don't know about you guys, but they bring out of me the most. And what I mean by that is, when you go there with an agenda to talk to somebody, hey, we're going to talk about these 3 things. You're going to talk about this or that. That's all good, but when they ask a question, it like draws out of me something for them.
Yeah.
That I always feel like there's more of a fruitfulness. And I use the word synergy there. And it really, I think it comes down to hunger. They're hungry, to hear and to grow in that area. So sometimes you may have an agenda, or something in my relationships, but I find that when the Holy Spirit is moving in those moments, and it's beautiful because, like Scott's going to talk about all the years that you've been serving the Lord, God is pouring into you, pouring into you, pouring into you. And when someone asks you something, it's almost like they open up a valve, and then it just starts to flow, and you feel that. So anyway, that's my experience.
Well, and the beauty of that is it is a constant reminder to the mentor of all that God has done for him. Yeah. In other words, so it's never a one-sided coin, and I think that people confuse that because they think, I don't have enough to give. Well, you do, because then it gets the spigot gets opened up, and you realize just how blessed you have been in your own life and how valuable that information is to someone that has yet to experience that.
So in a real sense, mentoring others is kind of selfish because it's a joyful experience of relationship building for us.
And once you buy into that, then you want to do more of it because it's so opening to you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, Scott, you say one of your 18 points of mentoring. And by the way, before I do that, Zach, do you mentor anybody?
I have. I'm not currently actively mentoring anyone. So if anyone wants to approach me, feel free.
Let's go. Let's go. That's great. Well, Scott's first point is he tries not to use the word mentoring when he meets with anyone. If they want to call it that, that's fine. Why don't you use the word mentoring?
I think mentoring has been given a bad connotation. In other words, if you look at a man and say, well, do you mentor anyone? I think what it does is because you are not currently, and most men I meet are not currently mentoring anyone, it makes them feel bad because I think innately we all want to. So I tried to not use that word so it doesn't set it off on the wrong step.
Like you're way higher than they are? No, but what I mean is it could set that, hey, can I mentor you?
Yes. In other words, I don't want to put that guilt trip on someone. I want them, in other words, I'd rather it be, would you like to just meet for a cup of coffee?
Yeah. Yeah. And you say even that you're not big about eating a meal over mentoring.
I prefer, and that was really in my business life too. I really never like to have a business meeting over food. It's too distracting. You're figuring out what you spend most of your time figuring out what you're going to eat, and you're interrupted by the waitress and all of these things. A cup of coffee is very simple. You sit down, and even if they want to have a Coke or whatever they want, but the bottom line is you're not being interrupted. And you're not then worried if you got something in your teeth or if you got a piece of food hanging off the side of your mouth. So it's just easier.
Now, these people you mentor, you're mentoring like 24 guys over 2 weeks, every other week, right?
Correct.
That's a lot of guys.
24 guys every 2 weeks?
Yeah, that's just kind of how I'm wired.
Whatever Scott does, I can say this, whatever he does, he goes all in. Yeah. Right?
That's it, yes. Belly flop.
Okay, so now do you ask them or do you wait for people to come to you?
Well, it began, in other words, I think maybe before that, I think one thing to think about is as I chose the date to retire, or God chose that date for me, the biggest fear I had was, what now am I going to do with myself? I'd gone to work every day of my life. I'd worked 80, 90, 100 hours a week for almost all of my life. And all of a sudden, it's almost like a river that had been flowing continually, and then now all of a sudden a dam has been built. And so what am I going to do? And my very first opportunity to figure out what God wanted me to do was I was in a meeting, and a young man was in the meeting, and it was surrounded by a whole bunch of old guys like me talking about how do we get young guys to come. And I reached out to that young guy and said, can we meet for coffee? After that, it's been it's kind of like the word got out, and now I have guys approach me, and then if I see a young man or get introduced to a young man, my first statement to him is, do you have time to meet for coffee?
Yeah. Wow. That's great. And I guess that's what I'd like more and more of our men at Forge to do, is to keep reaching out to other men, younger men. I do like that idea of all of us having a Paul, a Barnabas, and a Timothy in our life. I mean, I really like that. You know, somebody who's older than us, teaching us, mentoring us, discipling us, somebody alongside who is a friend, encouraging us, and then a Timothy that we're pouring into, at least one.
I think that's a great idea, but I think one thing, in other words, I've got a man 87 years old that I thought when we first started was really going to be more my mentor. And it really has not turned out quite that way, except as I really analyze what I'm doing with, I've got 18 to 87 right now. I'm being mentored by every single one of them. So each one of those guys can be your Paul or your Barnabas or what have you, no matter what age they are, because they're opening my eyes to something that I had not thought about before, maybe.
I got a question for you, Doctor. So you said something in the beginning. You said that Scott has a particular calling to mentoring.
I do.
What my question is, do you feel that a man has to feel called to do this? Or do you think that this is just a responsibility of every man?
I think we should guilt them into it as quickly as possible.
Absolutely.
Guilt is a gift that keeps on giving.
Yes.
You know, I think it. Yeah, I appreciate you getting me. You know, we're called to make disciples.
Right.
So that's a command.
Right.
Therefore, a responsibility.
Right.
So I would agree with you that I think it's a responsibility that every man has to pour back, to give out. And I find that most men want to do that. More older guys that are along in business, they want to train that younger guy. Now, there are some really narcissistic, selfish men. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. But I think generally speaking, younger men should be asking older men to mentor them. I think the younger generation often don't, though. Right now, a lot of younger guys are too passive and too afraid. My generation of baby boomers, we were always, we were just trained that way. You want to get ahead, get a mentor. But I think a lot of younger guys don't do that. So, good clarification.
Yeah. No, but I think that, and I don't know, not that I'm reading your mind, but I think that what you were going to say was that you do think that there is a special grace on some people's life to do this, though.
I do think some guys get it.
Yeah.
Scott's an extrovert off the chart. I mean, but I think some guys really feel that sense of unique calling.
Yeah.
Well, I think one way to look at that, and I think that's a rock solid question, but I also believe by putting that question out there, it could cause a man to try to, look inside and go, well, I'm not really being called to do that.
Right.
Think of it this way. There are lots of pastors in just our United States. And in whatever that number is, there is probably one that someone would say is the best, and maybe there's one that we would say is maybe the worst. I mean, there are probably some bad pastors out there.
Sure.
Absolutely.
But really, what does that mean? In other words, I believe a bad pastor can talk into someone's life just as easily as a great pastor can talk into someone's life.
Maybe we
If
think
God's
bad,
behind
like communicator.
Yes.
Like a bad, this guy, when he's behind the pulpit, he's kind of like he puts you to sleep, but he can really speak into your life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't want it to be that the only way you could mentor someone is because you felt called.
Yeah.
I believe that maybe some of us that do feel called, because I think God has definitely answered my prayer about what to do with my rewired life. But I'm praying that maybe through that enthusiasm that he's given me to do it causes other men to want to do it on their own. And I almost hesitate to even say how many men I'm doing, because then I don't want anybody to think you need to do 24 to be successful.
Right.
That's right. I mean, really, if we could mentor There's an interesting statistic about how many men there are in America and how many Christian men there are. But if every Christian man mentored, or tried to mentor two guys, we would change the country if we were pouring into other men.
Right.
And I think too, I love this. I was sitting in my chair one night at home. I looked over at my wife and I started crying, and she said, "What's the matter?" And I said, "It can tear me up right now thinking about it." The opportunity to change one man's life. I said, what I got was this vision of an ocean liner in the middle of the ocean. And I don't know if ocean liners have a steering wheel or not, but I envisioned where there would have been a steering wheel, there was the knob of a safe. And you know how that knob looks? It's 0, and then a click, 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 5, click, 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 10.
Yeah.
Okay. And I said, if I had the opportunity in my lifetime to turn that dial one click, you don't instantly see that ship changing course. But over the next 5 years, that ship could absolutely be in a different projection than it ever would have been. And that, to me, is what mentoring is all about.
That's awesome. So let me ask you, now when you say you had that vision, because I've obviously we've been co-table leaders for a few years now, probably like 8 years I think we've been at the table together, and I've had the privilege of watching you walk through the process of rewirement, and from where I sit, like conversations that we've had at the table, I feel like this burden increased as you started to see, like, okay, what is the next step, right? So when you had this vision that you're talking about, like, when would you say that happened?
That was probably shortly right before I met my first mentee, in between the children at that school that my wife and I were mentoring, and then that period of time, God began to kind of pull the curtains back. And I then began to see a somewhat clear path of what I needed to do. And as soon as I reached out and asked that young man, and we had our first meeting, I mean, it wasn't like I kind of knew. Instant. I mean, it was just like all the pieces of a puzzle. I kind of viewed it like a jigsaw puzzle box that's got all the pieces of a puzzle, but there's just not a picture on the box. So you got to start putting that puzzle together without a picture, which is pretty hard to do unless you let God do it for you. And when He does, bingo.
Yeah, that's good.
So when you meet with guys, what does that look like?
It's just organic. I mean, I come to the tables with no agenda. I have nothing that I particularly want to say. We don't necessarily pray before we meet. I don't have a Bible sitting there with me. I don't have a notepad. I don't have a pen out. My phone's on silent. This is a time. I view it this way. Every one of us sitting at this table right here, right now, has at least one person that they would say is their best friend or a good friend. I don't know what best means, but good. And then I would say, maybe you talk to that friend once a week, once a month, once every 6 months, once a year, or just randomly. When you pick the phone up or however you choose to communicate, don't you just always pick up right where you left off? In other words, you don't plan for a week what you're going to say to your best friend. You just pick the phone up and you start talking. That's what this mentoring to me is all about.
How's it going? Hey, Scott, how you doing? What's going on?
What was your week like last week? Or is there anything in particular? I've asked sometimes, is there anything in particular that particularly has bothered you over these last 2 weeks that maybe you have not been sharing with me prior that you'd like to open up with? Or, boy, that Eagles game was really good. I mean, just anything, whatever's going on. Wasn't that a heck of a plane crash the other day that we saw on television? I mean, it's just life. I mean, we're just sharing life.
Yeah. Men, that's good to hear, because a lot of times we're too scheduled to even think that way. That what we need to do is move into that relational mode. And just talk and develop a friend. But I think, So we think I got to have the PhD in mentoring to do mentoring, and really it's no. I just have got to be willing to share my life and be open to getting to know somebody else.
Exactly.
So when you get to know somebody else, you have to ask a lot of questions.
Perfect.
I mean, I do.
Yeah. And I think a great opener, too, when you start this process, is sharing your testimony. That pretty much is in my first meeting. What I like to do is let the young man or older man that I'm visiting with understand the path that I have traveled. So I share what I call my X-rated version of my testimony, which is the real testimony.
And we can't tell it on this podcast.
We all have to kill you.
Get an appointment with Scott McCurdy and he'll tell you.
Exactly.
But I think that's an opener, and it allows that person to really realize I'm really just as a flawed man as that guy sitting with as he is. In other words, and make sure he understands I don't have all the answers. We're going to work our way through this.
Wow. So you don't come with an agenda. You ask about his family and where he's at in life. You tell your story. You get him to tell his story.
Right.
And what's it done for you and your faith to be a mentor?
I told my wife that night that I had that vision that I had. And I don't mean a vision. I mean, call it what you may. I mean, it just came to me. What I'm currently doing means more than anything I've ever done in my entire life. Of all the business accolades I've had, or the successes and the failures and all of that, I literally today cannot imagine what I would do with myself if I didn't have this, because it is that fulfilling. It is absolutely completing the end of my life. And I pray that, I used to say, I'd love to just be walking across my pasture where my cows are and just drop dead right in the pasture. And my wife would end up having to find me by Find My Phone type thing. But I literally wouldn't mind be sitting with one of the men that I'm mentoring with and breathe my last breath. That'd be
traumatic for him.
But and he may not know I have a DNR too.
I mean, it can be arranged, Scott.
Yeah, okay. We do have a black ops squad at Forge, and
I'm not quite ready yet.
Okay, all right.
You laugh a lot. Are your mentoring times fun? I mean,
always. I mean, if they're not fun, you're not going to come back. I mean, if this becomes cumbersome, or oh my gosh, I've got to go open my heart, or oh my gosh, I don't want to share anything today, or whatever. I mean, who has a best friend that you feel that way with? That's really what I'm trying to do, is create right now 24 best friends. In other words, that's really all I'm trying to do. And it doesn't have anything to do with how much wrong you've told me or how much right you've told me. It's just looking forward. In fact, I think in most cases, they're more looking forward to it than I am, and that's pretty hard to get there. I mean, I'm really looking forward to it. It's not a burden.
Yeah. So it's fun. It's enjoyable. I mean, do you ever get tough on your mentees?
I've had several that I've had to cut loose. I mean, literally just say, this is a waste of my time and it's a waste of your time.
Well, how do you know if meeting with a guy is a waste of time? I know, because I've had those too. But how do you articulate that?
I don't know. I think that I've lived long enough that I know when I'm being fed a line of that. Now I can walk through that and try to undo that and then I'm very stern about telling that person that you're not telling me the truth right now, and you're selling me, and I'm not interested in being sold. And either we're going to get down to the nitty-gritty, or you and I are going to part ways. So I'll give that person a task for the next 2 weeks to do something that I believe is going to help that person get out of this little trap that they're in. And 9 times out of 10, I have it nailed. And 9 times out of 10 in that 2-week period of time, they stand me up or tell me they have to cancel. And it pretty much it's almost kind of like, you know when you got a pimple when you see the whitehead.
So when you talk about this, right, it sounds like on the front end, like this is kind of loosey-goosey, just like, hey, we're getting together, we're going to have some fun. But then it doesn't really sound like it's just getting together to have fun. Like you really want to help these men grow in their lives.
Absolutely.
And there are some expectations with your relationship.
Yes, and sometimes those expectations are kind of unspoken expectations. But if, I had one guy that I met with for almost 8 months, and his first words out of his mouth when we first started meeting was, I just need you to know that I'm an excellent liar. And I spent 2 months trying to help him understand how that has made me feel in those first 2 months of meeting, because I didn't know when he was telling me the truth and when he wasn't telling me the truth.
That's right.
And after 8 months, he never was telling me the truth. He was really right. He was really good.
Why did he want to meet with you at all? Why does a guy choose to have a mentor if he's going to lie to him?
Well, I think in his particular case, he needed someone to lie to because he'd ruined all of his other friends.
He had to keep his skills sharp.
Yeah. I got to practice up,
In other cases, and one in particular I can think of, I think his parents wanted him to meet with me because they desperately wanted him to come out of this funk that he was in. And it didn't work.
Yeah, it didn't work. Yeah, and some guys, I know a couple of your situations, not by name, but just, you said, well, this guy got into trouble with his wife, and so he had to have somebody that he was meeting with outside of a counselor.
Right.
And so and he was playing a game with you. He
Right.
wasn't shooting straight, and
Right.
he BS right and left, and you finally cut him loose.
Right. And it hurts because I'm not a quitter. I mean, I want to take everything to completion. I don't know what completion looks like, but I'd certainly know kind of what it doesn't look like. And in those cases, I have to just literally, I pray about it and get a peace about it. And my prayer is they'll come back. I'm hoping that the door has been left open, not slammed shut, but just, closed for business right now. Temporarily.
You don't burn the bridges if you don't have to.
I really don't want to, because that man still needs help.
And you pray for your mentees.
Absolutely.
You pray for their family.
Absolutely. And I know their wives' names and their kids, their ages, the birth dates, and I get all of that. And sometimes I have to ask more than once because I don't write anything down, so I try to remember it. In other words, I just kind of want it to be organic. And then every other month, I write each one of my guys that I meet with a personal note. And sometimes I address it to the wife to let them know, to be proud of their husband, that, that I never share detail, but just that your husband and I are getting along great, and he's just really progressing, and he deserves a pat on the back.
Yeah, Scott also is a committed note writer. And in a day and age in which texts and emails are prolific, but to get a note in the mail, handwritten note, thinking about you, praying for you, it means a lot.
Yeah, I think so.
So that's now. How long do you meet with a guy? You
1
meet
hour,
him
and it's sharp.
Really?
We start, if I have a scheduled appointment at 8 o'clock, it goes from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock. If he shows up at 8:15, it goes to 9 o'clock. If he shows up at 8:30, it goes to 9 o'clock. It does not go past that period of time.
What if he's a Puerto Rican and shows up late, time-wise?
That
He
is
gets-
that
he
is
gets a
so
paddle in.
that
He
is
gets a paddle. Yeah. Jason, can you address that?
Well, I make them, everybody understand
I'm
if you're
gonna-
early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. If you're late, you're fired.
Jason was the first one here for recording. We were all the late ones.
Okay. I know.
Thank you, Zach. I appreciate you having my back there because I felt all the shade that was coming my way.
No,
I'm
I
like,
see you.
Oh man, I hate the one thing I had to throw out was a wedding I did with a Puerto Rican wedding once. I mean, it was an hour late.
Oh, yeah.
When's the bride gonna show up?
She's preparing.
Oh, man.
It's opposite. We're waiting for the bridegroom, and he's the one we're waiting on. But brides and Hispanic weddings, they just they're beautifying themselves.
That's right. They're getting ready.
I want to bring the Bible into this just a little bit because it'd be a shame to have a podcast where we don't quote the Bible. But
Right.
Can someone please talk about how this connects with Jesus's last command to his disciples before he ascended up to heaven, and that is to go and make disciples?
Yeah.
How does that connect to this?
Well, I think it clearly does, right? It's we tend to make disciples as pastors by preaching. We think that but Jesus he taught, but he was always moving around, interacting with hundreds of people. And so it was more organic, more natural. The natural way to build people is to spend time with them. Mm-hmm. Just like that idea is, if you want to be close to God, you can't do that in a crowd. You got to be alone with God. Right. And I think it's true. If you want to be friends with somebody, you got to spend time alone with them or in some kind of environment.
Well, I mean, relationship, right? That's the word, right? It's discipleship is relationship based,
right?
And for us, we heard a great teaching today at Forge where he talked about the difference between an Eastern and Western mindset. And I think that's the difference. We think that it's just, if I give you a bunch of information, then you should be good. And that's how we've been taught. But really, sometimes you need somebody to walk with you and help you grow in that application of the things that you're learning. And not just here, but with Jesus and his disciples, he told them, follow me. He didn't just say, listen to me.
Right.
He said, follow me.
Follow me.
And I think that just us Westerners, we're too busy for you to follow me because I got this appointment, I have that appointment. And I would say we might need to slow down if we want to actually see the fruit of this command that we've been given. And I think mentoring is, like I said, it's in the relationship. I can have 10 things, and even you, Dr. Pete, when you're mentoring with me and discipleship with me, we sit down and we have conversation and you listen, you ask questions, you'll pray for me, you'll say, hey, I'm not saying this is thus says the Lord, because obviously you're reformed and you would never say that. But you'll say, I was praying about this and I hear, and I hear it. I'm like, okay, this could be from the Lord because he's coming out of a place of prayer, caring for me, but I have to weigh that, right? Mm-hmm. But I think that's what discipleship is. It's like, hey, man, I was praying for you. Or in the conversation as we're talking, this might come to mind. I have like this is something that I really sense here from the Lord. But I think that all of that is in the context of relationship. And I think that what you're discussing and describing is that relational component.
Absolutely.
Hey, man, I have an hour that I can give you every other week that we're going to sit down face to face. I'm going to pray for you. I'm assuming, and this is just my assumption, I'm assuming that well, I know this for sure, that you're praying for your mentees. Right. But I would also assume that you probably communicate with them outside of your written note, outside of that 1 hour, maybe a text here or there, or they reach out to you.
Absolutely.
And it's just that availability that helps them grow.
You just hit it, because I believe that if you were to ask me to give a title to what it is that I believe mentoring is all about, it is the ministry of availability.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
End of story. In other words, I'm making myself available. And Pete, to get back to the fun side of it, in other words, if this is not fun, then you're not going to continue doing it. None of us continue doing anything that's not fun.
Yeah.
In other words, I wouldn't continue to come to Forge if there wasn't a fun factor in the whole context of the biblical study that we're doing. And it's the same thing with mentoring. It has to be that. And I get men all the time say, well, I don't have time to do this. And I love that. I love when that comes up, because when someone says to you, I don't have time, they're lying to you. It's an absolute lie. We make time for every single thing we want to make time for.
Yeah, that's true.
So when I hear that, I don't have time, you're telling me you really don't want to. So I tell them, just tell me you really don't want to. Then you won't be lying to me. But you will make time if this is what you want. So as I see men make time for this, then you're knowing that this is something that they're looking forward to. Or a man texted me on the way over here that I'm supposed to meet tomorrow, and he's got a conflict, but he says, what other day can we meet? Which is just confirmation that this is just not, he's not checking a box
Right,
with me.
right.
He really wants to meet.
They're checking in with you ahead of time, and you check in with them ahead of time.
Exactly.
Do that. That's a real practical dimension of it because we're so busy.
Yes.
And but when we see the value of something, we go after it.
Yeah. And then there's grace. I mean, this is not like, well, if we don't meet every 2 weeks, then we fail. No, it's okay.
Right.
We'll just redo. But I will say this, if you are set up to do this, then if, in most cases, if a man can't meet with me on the day and the time that we have this set up, then it's 2 weeks before we can do it again. In other words, I don't try to shuffle the cards and the deck and everything else. It's just, we just let it go. Okay, we'll be fine. We're not going to fall apart.
Yeah.
Everything's good.
Good.
That's great.
Well, great stuff. I love this topic. We've covered a lot today, but obviously there's a lot that we could talk about. But we're going to end it here. I want to thank everyone for listening to this episode. We'd love it if you'd subscribe to the show, like it, leave a comment, that kind of thing, engage. But Scott, thank you so much for coming on.
No, I'm honored to be here.
Absolutely. Pete is going to leave us with a challenge today.
All right. Challenge, if you want to meet Scott, come to Forge on Tuesday here in Winter Springs and sit at his table, and you'll learn a lot more. But man, I tell you, every man can be a mentor, and grace enables us to see, men, that God is doing more in your life than you think he is. And you, by the grace of God, have a lot to give. 42% of Americans are born again, they say. 38 million men in America. 25 million children under 18 will go to bed tonight in a house with no dad. There are young boys to mentor. There are young men to mentor. And if we want to bring in the kingdom of God, it can start this way. So go for it.